In this article, Dress for the Weather, it is in a 5th grade class in Massachusetts, and a teacher is trying to teach the difference between weather and climate. And how they kind of start out following the 5E learning cycle is he tries to get them engaged by asking them, if someone were traveling to our area for the first time during this time of year, what would you tell them to bring to wear? And why? So kids just begin, everyone in the class, they begin to brainstorm and think about what they would tell someone to bring and what you tell them to wear for the weather then in Massachusetts. The backstory is that day, it's a cold spring day, and there's a mixture between rain and a wet snow. And then kids kind of write their list, and some of the reasons that they or things that they write down is gloves and boots and shoes and socks. And then they had to write because when they looked out the window, they saw that it's rainy and kind of a wet snow out. So it's cold today, so that's what they would need. So then they kind of go into that explorer area where besides their personal experiences and just by looking out the window, where else can they find this evidence? So they think about, the news or the internet. So they need to think about some resources that recently happened, whether from last year or the year before that. So they go to the National Weather Service website and they kind of brainstorm from the past 2 weeks or the previous 2 years, and then they ask some questions and then think about what is the temperature from this time to this time. And this is really cool. They get to integrate math with it because they have to find the average of the temperatures. And they're doing this while working with a partner and writing it in their science notebooks. Then students begin to see the mean of the weather and how it's not typically that cold maybe during the time of year. So they kind of cross off or add things to the list, and then they tell why. And then they write down similarities and differences and have a class discussion. But one thing that they did have to write down is why they made these changes. And the most common items that were deleted from the original list were things like winter gear, scarves and gloves and things, because they noticed it was not usually cold or snowy enough for them. The most common additions were a lighter jacket or a rain jacket and umbrellas because it rained at least a little bit more. And umbrellas because it rained at least a little on more days than others. Then the teacher kind of explains to the whole class by looking at this and changing the list that it's not longer based on weather but on something else, which is climate. So that's when the teacher kind of starts to explain what climate is. And I'll just explain it. It is usually an area during a certain time of year, so what it feels like. And then weather can change based on the day or hour, but climate changes based on the time of year. So those are some of the examples that the teacher gives. After the students kind of learned what weather and climate were, they elaborated with the location. So if you're from Massachusetts, Boston, Miami, Florida, and those kind of areas, what is the differences and what are the similarities to those in the area? And they were trying to answer some of these questions for each pair of cities, which has the higher summer temperature and which has the lower temperature, what patterns are the difference between the cities' locations and climates, and which cities had the greatest changes in temperature. Then the students were wanting to know, why is there a difference between these two locations? So then we evaluated. So first, the teacher got one container of sand and one with water and put heat lamps on them to see which one heated up the fastest. And then the students learned which is which at the end. So the one that represented Boston was the one with the water because it is near an ocean, of course. Then the students learned that Boston is near the ocean, and in the summertime the sun won't heat up as fast either, so water stays cooler. So they basically asked these questions and they learned why some areas' climates and weather are different.